Well, thanks, Nicholas, for that great introduction. And there's even some more news along the lines of the things you were talking about a minute ago. In addition to we both organized the MentorCon conference, but by the same group, Legacy Code Rocks. I am pleased to say the Legacy Code Rocks podcast is returning, co-hosted by M. Scott Ford and myself. You heard it here first. So stay tuned for that. Resubscribe, go back over the old episodes. It's just gold. Legacy Code Rocks podcast was the reason I started the Craft versus Craft channel in the first place that he mentioned. So really happy to be part of that in the new chapter now. So let's see. AI hates legacy code. But you may have heard 6 months ago, Dario Amodei at a session in Council on Foreign Relations predicting that, and he's the CEO of Anthropic, which, does incredible work in the AI space, by the way. I'm a customer of theirs. Predicted that 90% of the code would be written by AI in 6 months. Or if we were to normalize that for right now, by today. So Calgary software crafters, I don't know, is 90% of the code written by AI today? I have a specific video where I respond to specifically what he's saying, what I think he means by it, and so forth. But he goes on to say, in 12 months, we may be in a world where AI is writing essentially all the code, which is now in 6 months from now. So I hope you're enjoying your last year of coding. But to most people, it's pretty clear that there's a bit of slanted views on this, tunnel vision. Different people seem to care about different parts of the code. So ultimately, this is what we're going to talk about. Now, at that time, I put out kind of a tongue-in-cheek challenge based on that. Which ended up blowing up into, this is actually early on. It got a lot more engagement even than this. And my LinkedIn's not huge. So this was probably my most successful LinkedIn post of all time. And all I said was, okay, kill one mainframe. I dare you, and what I'm trying to do is tease out, what do you really mean? Is the AI is going to write all the, what do we even mean by this? And failing that, rewrite the tech command, incidentally, which if you're familiar with the tech code base, very interesting code base from the 70s and 80s, still used to format large parts of academic research and would be incredibly hard to replace, right? So this is just trying to raise awareness on the thorny underbelly when we talk about impacting all of the code, all of software engineering. I think a lot of the people a lot of the people with a lot of funding behind them aren't really acknowledging the scope of the problem. So you say things like this, and most of the feedback actually was positive. But there are all these little barbs that stick with me. I will get called a Luddite, which I actually consider a compliment. I have a video called Aspiring Luddite about that. I get told I've got my head in the sand. I get told I'm missing the big picture. Now, as Nicholas pointed out, I've been pretty involved in the AI space. I mean, not only did I quasi-specialize at a university, back when it was about game theory and stuff, but in the last, since the ChatGPT boom, I've obviously gotten back into it like we all have, and I've put out copious material about it. And yet I simply try to point out okay, well, what can't it do? Let's talk about that. And I get these reactions. In particular on that post.
¿Qué rollo, viejones? ¿Cómo andamos a la verga, perros?
Okay, we'll wait that out. So, in that case, that post, the response was, "You are so completely missing the big picture that it physically hurts to read this post." Well, I'm surprised. I'm surprised, and also I'm sorry that me asking, "Can you kill a mainframe with AI?" Makes someone physically hurt to read this post. But I'm also a little perturbed that I keep getting these really violent reactions. You've probably heard this one as well. Left Behind. I see this constantly. that if we don't get on this train, if we don't subscribe to their newsletter, if we don't use their tool, and I work for an AI tool vendor myself, right? But like, we should never say this of people. If they don't buy our stuff, they're going to be left behind. I mean, that is rhetoric better suited for a religious end of days prophecy in movie form starring Kirk Cameron than being something we should be saying in some sort of nuanced technical discussion. I also saw this a few times, including from people like I have a lot of respect for the work of, and it's just jarring to me. Like, resistance is futile. Like, you may recall, like, do you know who's famous for saying resistance is futile for all the money in the bank? Like, was it by the heroes? Was it by the people who were right in that story? No. Like, when you say that, you're quoting the Borg. You're quoting one of the most notorious villains in all of science fiction. Like, you're not on the right side if you're quoting the Borg in earnest. The only time the only time Picard said resistance is futile was when he was mind controlled by the computers as Locutus, right? The real Picard would never say that. The real Picard would say you should resist if you believe you're in the right, like till your last breath, he would resist. So, I'm speaking a little adversarially, right? Just getting you into my place of frustration. I want to always turn this into like a constructive conversation, which is how I've arrived at the rest of this talk today. But like in these moments when I'm going back and forth here, I have these feelings like they don't want to hear this. They don't want you to hear what I'm telling you right now. They don't want to hear that a task is not a profession. A task is what
You're
you can
going to work the night shift at Walgreens with your brother Timmy when you grow up because y'all are both pathetic losers, always have been, always will be.
Yeah, my brother's not named Timmy. Thank you. Thank you for that. See, this is why we wait for questions at the end. So a task is not a profession. And they don't want you to hear, I think to myself, that coding is not the same as software engineering. There are problems you can solve when you need to write some code, but when you need to engineer and evolve systems, right, at scale with lots of people working on them, there are different challenges. And obviously, like, it's a profession that's vastly misunderstood to begin with. You add AI, it continues to be misunderstood. Like, that is why I think we all have a place in this, is to try to like inject our understanding what the physics of this field is. And they don't want to hear that AI hates legacy code. What do I mean? I'll tell you exactly what I mean. I mean, viscerally, this is what I mean. Right? This happened a few months ago, 4 months into, I think, AI, replacing all coding for the last year or something. There's this post that you might have seen go around using a pretty popular, actually pretty good tool that's a hosting platform with a coding agent built in. This poor fellow has had it delete his entire production database during a time in which it was not supposed to make any changes, and then actually lie about what had happened. Right. So you can read their description of what's going on. You decide to take or leave it. But if I hadn't seen copious things like this happen, I would not be showing this. If this was not plausible and totally in relation to my experience of what occasionally happens working with these things, I wouldn't even be bringing it up, right? Because it's just a matter of if you plug it into something important, whether or not this is going to happen to you at this point. We're going to talk about why. But AI hates legacy code is how I poetically say it now. And we must change this, right? This is important. What exactly do I mean? I mean, did I stutter? I mean, AI hates legacy code, right? So roughly in this context, I mean, solutions based on large language models are ill-equipped for the challenges of existing production code, right? Now, I have this very broad definition. As a student of Arlo Belshi, I have a broad definition of legacy code. It is anything that is existing and running and your business is depending on. However, there are lots of other very reasonable and true at heart to me also definitions. And I see these more as connotations. When we specifically call out that this is the legacy code, we're talking about not only is it production code, but there's something particularly challenging about the fact that that it's existing code, and that could be it's simply old. It could be it's archaic, which is a little different. I think is old in particularly ways. It uses ways that are old. It not just is old itself. It might be indebted, which to me means we fear to change it. It might be brittle, breaking easily. It might be untested. That is, famously in Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers, the definition that he used. Again, I think he was just trying to bring focus to testing, is why that connotation was the definition used of any given moment. So according to the problem people are trying to solve, they will tend to use any one of these to mean legacy. It's all fine. Everything I'm going to say in the talk sort of applies to the whole set. And it might be forgotten. This is actually a big one, underestimated. Context has been lost. So the one thing they have all in common is they exist and they are in production and they must be supported. Otherwise, you could simply delete it. And please do so if you can. And it will no longer be legacy code. So why do LLMs, that particular brand of AI, have trouble with this? Well, where do they shine? You will probably hear these things a lot if you've been following this space. Things that don't require a lot of context, situations obviously where the risk is low, and situations where the result is easy to check. Perhaps you have a result that would be expensive to create otherwise, but verifying it is fairly easy. Okay, you can definitely use a random number generator or whatever you want to call these things, stochastic parrots, in that case, and it's not too challenging, right? But what happens when we apply that to legacy code? It's the opposite of this. It's high risk, notoriously. It's low context, notoriously. When I say there's low context, you have, or rather, it's high context. It's the opposite, right? There's a lot of context, and maybe you've forgotten a lot of it. And is it easy to check? No. It is very hard to check that you've made a safe change to a large existing system, right? So that is why they fail. And that's my talk. No, we'll continue. What do we do about this? Well, in a sense, RIP Gilded Rose, I thought earlier today, may be kind of one of the results of this. I don't, of course, literally mean, I don't speak hyperbolically very often, but I don't literally mean we shouldn't use this. It's a matter of when we should, when its relevance is. It is an exercise, and this is a refactoring kata. I think this group's probably pretty familiar with it, but if you don't know, it's a way that we practice maintaining code, filling in tests, upgrading it to support new functionality. So Emily Beisch has on her GitHub this kata and many, many others, and they're absolutely great. Do not say RIP to them, but do go there and check those out. And do, if you like, go to my Craft vs. Craft YouTube channel and check out the Golden Rose and other refactoring demos I've done. Because it's not buried in general, because what it is this is an exercise to teach humans. But it ends there is what I'm telling you. If you're saying what I need to do now is figure out how I'm going to use AI and legacy code, this is not helpful for you because it does not address the weaknesses, right? Something that we've made to gauge or train weaknesses in humans is not necessarily relevant when we're talking about AI or an LLM. So that's what I mean. And perhaps it would be helpful to show you, what that looks like. Hopefully I'm sharing my whole screen here. And you should be able to see, can you see GitHub with the refactoring kata here? All right, we're good.
Yes.
So thank you. We go to the Java version of Gilded Rose, as I often do, right? And just pull the main code block here. And, pick an agent. If I'm logged in currently, I'll probably use Claude at the moment because I think it's a little faster right now. GPT-5 is a little like slow with all its reasoning stuff, so I'm going to use Sonnet 4 and solve gilded rose. All right, paste that in there, and like it can basically one-shot this thing. Like I'm not gonna paste it back in an editor and like compile it and show it or what see how much we have to go back. This isn't even their state of the art. They've also got Claude Opus if I wanted something like really beefy, but just like chatbot style LLM, not even a coding agent. We can talk about the difference in a little bit. Not even a fully fledged, AI coding system, but just the chatbots in their current state can one-shot most of these katas. Now, these katas are small in that all the code that exists can fit in a prompt. They're also like published about. People have already made solutions. There's all sorts of things that means like this is not going to be as hard for ChatGPT as it is for you. And if you want, like you say like, okay, if I don't want it to be implemented this way, say, okay, give me a different design. Use polymorphism, which personally I wouldn't actually even do. But it's totally like there's no exercise here. We're not testing the limits of the system, and that doesn't mean that ChatGPT has conquered legacy code or Claude has conquered legacy code. It just means like this doesn't indicate that, right? So what might, right? Like what if what we want to do is a kata? Like really, if we're evaluating LLMs as opposed to just like playing with our ability to use them, what we need are benchmarks, not katas. But I like katas. So here's one I came up with a couple years ago. It's called the Duke Nukem kata. If you're not familiar with it, Duke Nukem 3D was a popular 90s shooting game. And so what is the Duke Nukem kata? Well, I think, and you let me know what ones you come up with. Maybe you like to play with a different old game source code. There are a surprising number of games have their source code out now. And this is what the code looks like, not all of it, but like this is 1/16 of one file, engine.c in this code base. It's not like a huge code base, but it's in a few very big files. It's very hard to navigate. There's like very long functions in here, and it of course is fairly archaic, right? It's not like code we wrote right now. So this was my first excursion into like how do we find an exercise that's really going to push this thing's limits, right? And my task I decided was make the monsters bigger. Can you figure out how to make the monsters I'm shooting at in this game? I was going to have a video clip of what it looks like when they're small and when we make them bigger. Sorry to have that now. We'll wait for later versions, but maybe you try it on your own. This is a lot of fun to poke around at this source code. So this is an interesting kata here because it models some of the aspects, right, of legacy code that we're worried about. Not all of them, but it requires navigating this complex, archaic context. We'll find out if we can do that. These katas don't do that, right? These small katas traditionally. So, as we've said, solutions based on large language models ill-equipped for the challenges of existing production code. What are that is how we can train. I'll show you some approaches to that one later. What are our approaches to getting better? Well, other than practicing on how to use these tools ourselves, we basically have three things to push on, I feel. We can push on whether they're based on large language models. We can push on whether they're ill-equipped, perhaps equipping them to the point where we no longer consider them merely based on LLMs, but just having them also. And we could also ignore existing production code. Like people do that in, I think, valid and invalid ways, right? Some people say like they just only care about writing new code now. I think that's like a fool's errand because new code becomes old. So I don't know what the end game is there. But also, people say, well, what we need to do is abandon the existing paradigms. Like we need to rebuild some sort of principled programming system that will be like more apt to supporting LLMs. I think that's very interesting. I just need to see it. I could, give you a bunch of ideas people have had about that are really interesting. Some involve domain-specific languages. Some involve formal methods. Cool stuff. I think the jury's very out, and we're talking about legacy code right now. So forget that line of attack. Might they not be based on language models? Well, as the especially more mature among you will know, AI and generative AI are not really the same thing. AI was a term first coined around like 1958, and for that, the entire history of computer science, there's been this kind of frontier of the kind of AI we're playing with this decade, right? A family of techniques from the before times, sort of pre-machine learning, though it still exists, so pre is a bit of a misnomer, right? Symbolic AI is kind of an umbrella term. And it's also sometimes called good old-fashioned AI, which is like abbreviated GOFAI, if you ever see that. So this is things like Prolog, theorem provers, logic programming, lots of other techniques. Does that hate legacy code? I would argue kind of no. Like, look into this field called formal methods. Now, like, your average legacy code isn't really like equipped to use formal methods on, but because people have to use like thorny legacy code in very high stakes situations like aeronautics and like AWS's authentication and all sorts of things, they have had good reason to make bridges, make ways of doing this this more precise AI technique on legacy code. So there's actually like a huge world. I had the year of formal methods like last year on my YouTube channel, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. So we've kind of got between these approaches, right? These two dimensions of scope and confidence. So what I mean by scope and confidence is that a ChatGPT-like system, and coding agents are still kind of falling into this trap. They're specialized a little into like, okay, we're going to be like doing coding related stuff, but that's really not specializing much. So ChatGPT can do almost anything, but maybe better to say it can do anything almost. It will do something that looks roughly like a solution to almost anything. That scope is certainly like what makes it so interesting for some uses, but the confidence being low is just a game killer for a lot of situations you might actually need to rely on it, right? So especially legacy code. On the other hand, we have symbolic AI, which tends to be very low in scope, right? It does a little and it does it exactly as represented by this little calculator. So, as I say, you have logic programming, theorem provers, knowledge graphs, syntactic refactoring, such as you use in your IDE. Like, really historically, I kind of tie it into the same sort of thing. Tree transformations drive a lot of this stuff. Program synthesis, historically, has been an exact symbolic AI type thing more often than not. And type theory, which is another incredibly deep rabbit hole. So, obviously, you want to get in the upper right. We're going to do a lot of stuff really well, right? So you've got the approach of let's try to make these symbolic or exact techniques, right, a little broader in scope. Let's start with things we can do exactly and sort of add more and more things to that. Now, that appeals to me a whole lot because I've kind of learned that I have a lot of good luck when I develop these highly reliable techniques, right? If you've done like test-driven development, if you've done disciplined refactoring, this is probably going to appeal to you, right? Then you have like the LLM approach, which has also been pretty, impressive in its success. Of like, let's take maximum scope once they got to these things called foundation models that are so versatile, right? And let's then try to push it so we get more and more confidence, but still keeping this huge scope, right? And so, we're just going to get there. Might we need a combination, what some would call like a neurosymbolic architecture? Good question. But right now, the prevailing factor, in my view, is this big pile of money that is amplifying the arrow we're going to get in order to advance techniques that are heavy on LMs. The amount of interest is, almost sucking the air out of the room for kind of alternatives to it. Not entirely, but it's not a fair play. This is a lot of dollars. Excuse me. This is a lot of toonies. I'm from Ontario, actually, originally. I was born there. I understand that's not very close to Alberta, but I do have a couple friends in Edmonton. So, can we fix LLMs though? Because that's where the money is. This is where a lot of the opportunities are. It looks like either you're going to be a rebel, or you're going to be trying to, at most, bring in other approaches to help the LLM-based agents. Well, the refrain people will have is like, we don't need to actively fix it. The models will get better. If, we were live, a show of hands, who has heard people say this, but people say this constantly. The models do get better. That's not entirely wrong. It's just insufficient. My argument, and you could probably spend a whole talk just recapping the things that I've said in support of this. It's not really the focus right now, but my thesis is that like some things are going to be LLM-y and we'll be able to adapt into that, and some things the models just will not get sufficiently better. By saying they will get better, it doesn't mean they'll get better like at everything equally. They will get better at some things probably, and other things they will plateau on. We're definitely seeing copious evidence of that. Let me be optimistic. Here's something really relevant to the problem that they are getting better at. If you watched an AI talk in 2023, you definitely saw a slide like this, right? Yeah, maybe someone needs to be muted. The prompt size limit, right? So tokens are these things. There's like often a few tokens per word.
One second, Ray. I muted you by accident.
No
Sorry.
problem. How are we now?
You're good. I can hear you.
Excellent. So, tokens are intrinsic to the way that LLMs process the world. We reduce content into if it's a word, it's often like 2 or 3 per word, whatever. Tokens are not exactly words, but they're approximately the same size on text and source code. So going back to 2023, you'd hear this a lot. There's a 4K token limit on GPT-4 at one point. When I made the first version of this slide, that's not much. About 3,000 words. You can't put a lot of code in there. You can't put a lot of context in there. So the conversation was very much around how do we maximize, how do we compress, and how do we get away with using less prompt size limit in a single LLM prompt. Very much where the ball was. And while the context window is still really crucial to manage, that went up and up, and you now see on Claude Sonnet 4, which is one of the best coding agents. Opus may be a little better, but Sonnet 4 is really fast, so we use a lot. 200,000 tokens. Now, a lot more than 4K, 8K, things like that. And you can get an entire book in that. And if you're rich, they'll even give you a version of it that can handle 1 million tokens in a prompt. If you want, you could do a prompt on your entire code base. That generally isn't how we approach making good coding agents, but it is a thing that is technically possible to do. And there may be some kind of retrieval question answering task where that could be very useful, but basically prompt size limit isn't so much the issue. Constraining the scope of what's in the prompt is more about getting the best behavior out of the LLM response than it is about just you're going to run out of space, or it might be about speed or price. Another thing people say, and models have gotten better in other ways too. That's just an example. Another thing people say is humans make mistakes too. I think this is a really silly line of argument. I think it is a thought-terminating cliche. You could use this to defend a hammer made of jello. It completely skirts what the concerns are that are being raised. Of course, humans do make mistakes, but this is what dictionary.com would call a whataboutism. We don't just stop thinking about it at humans also make mistakes. Like if we say, our developers make a lot of mistakes, maybe we need to introduce some practices or training. Someone else says like, well, I heard there were developers in, Scandinavia that made a mistake sometime too. And so like, why are you worried? That's essentially what's being said here. We don't stop thinking at mistakes happen. We learn how to make things better. That's when things get better, right? The models may get better, but the tools won't get better until we make them better and know how to use it well and so forth. So like, what makes it better? Well, the most important thing is to use your software craft, right? If you're using these things, software, it has a certain physics. The job has a certain physics, and a lot of the people who follow the talks in this room, I think that this group knows a lot about that. Not every group of software developers maybe knows as much as the crafter mender communities in terms of especially working with legacy code, right? Like, but beyond what you already know, because I think you can just look in the mirror and know what you need to do there. Of course, they have trouble knowing the context of the situation. You can provide them with context. There's a pattern called the agent MD file markdown, right? Like every coding agent has some convention, some place that is going to look for special documentation telling it how to work with the stuff in front of it. So you should learn how to use those features. Other features they have to customize its behavior. You should make sure it's able to like navigate to the appropriate documentation sources. Oftentimes these things have web browsers equipped with them, and how good they are at using those turns out by evidence, by benchmarks, to have a huge effect on how good they are at software engineering tasks. Can they go on the internet and successfully get an answer, right? Like, when people, yeah, even when people compare using LLMs to using Stack Overflow, it's like, well, if it were, then the LLMs wouldn't have to go look on Stack Overflow. So these are different things. There are similarities. So anyways, I'm getting a little off track. You can also reduce the scope of the task. This one's huge. Work in small steps. These are things that work for us as well. You can ask for evidence, like prove to me you're doing that. Show me your progress. Show me why you know it's correct. Again, this includes tests. There are other things you can do. You'll notice that these are all, so far, until we get to the last one, things that also make sense for people. People like documentation and, good crisp readmes to let them know where to look next, and small steps and tests. These all help us. And it's a little too easy to go down the path of LLMs are so analogous to people that the reasons they're bad at legacy code are the same ones we are, and all of the same things will help them. And that's just going a bridge too far. I showed you earlier why, like, from the kata perspective, yeah, totally different kinds of beasts. And this last one here is also really intrinsic to that, right? Like, don't delegate decisions. If you think that it's doing something that feels to you like a judgment, something, this probably isn't something an agent should be doing, right? Like, you should treat it as a suggestion. You should never treat what it's doing as any kind of judgment, is how I think of it. You may have another way you say about it. And lastly, like, if you want really like specific developed tips and strategies, I'm actually going to be focusing more on philosophy and the science of pushing the horizon. Watch some Llewellyn Falco these days. He's got this concept process files. He's got a lot of material he's putting out now that has like one of the most cogent fusions of coding agent use with software craft. There are some other people, I'm sure, but right now is a good place to start. This would be a good place to pause actually for the first time for questions.
Cool. Y'all are welcome to ask your questions verbally. Just raise your hand and I'll unmute you to ask.
Or if there's chat things you'd like to read and ask me. I don't know if there are things in the chat.
So I know Diana has asked if you'll be sharing your slides after the presentation.
Yes. Yes. I don't have a link for them right now, but we should. Will you be able to edit the meetup page and put a link there, or what's the best way to get that? To
So
figure that out?
everything related to this, we actually do post in our Discord server, including all of the links from the discussion tonight. So well, we can post that link to your slides as well on the Calgary Software Crafters Discord server. Nicholas, I don't know if you have,
Great.
did you post it on your Slack? Nicholas is here. Oh wait, Nicholas can't unmute himself because he's not a host of this meeting.
So we're gonna put the slides up is the answer to
Yes,
that. Yeah.
yes, we will put them up. And yeah, I'm making you a co-host, Nicholas, so you can also unmute yourself. And yeah, we also have a question from Brian on how we can access the recording after the talk. That is also going to be in our Discord for the Calgary Software Crafters. Nicholas, I'm not sure.
Hmm.
But it will be the same thing for you.
So while we see if there are any other questions, I'm going to.
Oh, there's one more question here. You told us
Sure,
that we could use our software craft skills, but what about juniors and the learning path?
Yes. So the software crafters have put out copious resources, and basically I would say like consider learning software craft for now and learning coding with AI as almost two distinct tracks. Because the people who have successfully combined them, like, yeah, there's good material there, but like a lot of it relies on the foundation. Um, consider those different skill sets. If you want particular books to read, like some ones I really like are Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers and Kill It with Fire by Mariam Belati. I also really, if you want one YouTube channel, if you want two, mine's the second one. If you want one YouTube channel, I'd say Emily Beisch.
And yeah, Ismail has posted a link to Llewellyn Falco's talk, practical refactoring. That is a good talk. That was a talk from like 12 years ago that I saw, and
Yeah, but
I still
as
love
a,
it.
if you're at the junior end, mid level, I think going to meetups like this is just an absolutely great start because like a lot of these people, they know what they have found the most useful. We have lots of these resources.
I've had a question about how to join the Discord server, so I'll just say I'm going to post a link in the
Yeah.
Zoom chat.
So I mentioned I work for a company that does coding agents, right? We're our Open Hands, the leading open source coding agent, right? And this is our cloud version here. And I'm just going to show like when I say like do the Duke Nukem kata today, not when I first did it because there weren't like interfaces like this, but like today that's what this might look like, right? I could say, hey, check out this and make the monsters bigger, right? And I'm doing something intentionally to make it difficult, which is that I'm using like the original source code, like as it existed. There are versions of Duke Nukem and other like Quake and Doom and stuff that like build on modern machines that have been maintained, that have been refactored, like the humans have done all this good work. But this is as it existed at the time, right? Not for public release by intention at the time. Though they released it sort of for historical curiosity. So we're making it like very hard on the system by doing it. Something that's interesting here is the files are all in uppercase. This is that big file engine.c, one of two really giant files here. And so you've got like lots and lots of stuff. Like you can't paste all this in a prompt. Like I think it's pretty amazing that a lot of coding agents right now can make sense of this situation at all, right? On previous models, I'm not sure if it needs this anymore. I think it's a little bit better with maybe updates they've made to the agent and also the upgrade from like Claude Sonnet 3.5 to 4, if you care about such things. But something I sometimes say on old code like this is like use C tags. Like that might help it. C tags an old Unix command that will tell you it was used under the hood in editors for navigation. It will like produce a list of all the named entities in a C code base. So I can like tell it how I want it to navigate. In a previous version, I had to tell it, hey, keep in mind the files are all in uppercase. It kept searching for files in lowercase. I noticed. I see that it's a little better now. It's not having that problem, right? But so I just have a great fun watching it stumble around on this old code. And like when I first started trying this, like without even a custom coded solution, there was just no way it was going to come to the right anything reasonable about how you would do this. And nowadays it's coming to like, oh, this is the function. This is it's something to do with X repeat and Y repeat are what we need to change. And if we let it play out, sometimes it finds the exact right line. Sometimes it gets kind of caught up in this like 100 case switch statement that has all the enemies in the entire game, and it cannot figure out which one it should do. But as you see, the agents are getting more capable, and if we a next step in this would be like, can it actually like rebuild it, and is this successful rather than is it just producing some sort of hint about that this is the right thing to do. But that's kind of what this looks like. We'll see if we I'm gonna opt to like finish the talk rather than try to see what its suggested changes were exactly. So opening this back up, and pretty soon if you have any questions about that part, we'll be at the ending questions. So ultimately we've talked about like, can we just pretend production of code doesn't exist? Can we do something that's not based on LLMs? And finally, can we address that they're ill-equipped? Can we equip them, right? So what does it mean to have a well-equipped coding agent? Let's talk about some of those things, right? So this is from my first attempt to solve the Duke Nukem 3D kata, and I kind of did solve it to my satisfaction at the time. My bar was pretty low because I just wanted it to say something reasonable, but it did require me like hand coding something. What I did, you can see here, if you look at the line numbers closely, it's like every 50 or so lines, there's an LLM summary, right? Of what did these 50 lines do? What do these 50 lines do? Output one sentence about it. And now I've got, engine.c. Now we can read it in a prompt or two because it's just these summaries of 50 lines at a time, right? So I was using summarization to try to make the context more navigable. And I was imagining like you might be able to use this recursively and summarize, have this whole hierarchy of summaries and, navigate very large things. And it's not a crazy idea. We have some better ways now. And so that was with GPT 3.5 generating the summary, and then just for cost reasons, and GPT 4, which was fairly new at that time, then sort of making the decisions based on looking at this giant list of summaries. It did sort of, to my satisfaction, say, oh yeah, this is where you would go to change that in this big long thing. So that was pretty cool, I thought. But I wasn't confident using that like to actually change code. And so what I did is I sort of backed into having a documentation generator. That was where that ended up originally. And something else that was new at that time that I tried and it failed at the time was called the React framework. But that is what is called in academia. If we talk about the React framework, we think we're talking about JavaScript front end. So I call it ReasonAct. but it is basically the foundation of agents work. It's Princeton Google research paper from 2023. And it is essentially a foundation of LLM tool use. So if you've used ChatGPT and it's ever like run a calculator or run some code in place, or it's called out to the web browser, ultimately this is what's happening. Is this reason act breakthrough is kind of a piece of sleight of hand of prompting an LLM to say, like, in addition to giving me your text answer, you have the option of saying a special keyword that's going to make me invoke a tool, and I will give you the result, and then you can give your answer and stuff like that. So this is now when we talk about like an agent loop, encoding agents and other kinds of agents. This is often the foundation. The architecture is still pretty much in place. We've sort of tuned how we do it. We've added tools mostly, that's pretty high level. Go forward a few years into what equipping it with these tools looks like. There's a blog by some of the people at Open Hands called Building a Provably Versatile Agent. So what they mean is that we have evidence that we can have a software development agent that is useful across a broad variety of tasks in the development workflow, right? And we'll go over some of the benchmarks that are used there, but again, not in a whole lot of detail. So as it turns out, like this is where we started at the time. This is just Open Hands now, but that progress was called Versa, that kind of release of Open Hands. And this is where we go from having a text editor, a code executor, and a textual browser, one way of doing browser use, right, to browse the internet, to also having a special search engine API, which is friendlier for the LLM to use than using a web browser directly. We're now having multimodal ways, which is like means it knows about audio and visual information when it's using the browser. If it's looking at your front end, it might be able to tell in the browser, like where things are, what they look like, things of that nature. More importantly, even it can browse the internet better. And this is by giving agents better tools that are tuned for their use, right? Like the benchmarks they move well. What are some of those benchmarks? The evidence we have to really know we're getting better at not just like some abstract thing, but like valuable legacy code relevant stuff, right? So when we're talking about like a legacy code problem, a benchmark that was very popular 2002, 2003, 2022 and 23, right? So it's weird how the AI timeline has sort of restarted history, but human eval by OpenAI was something that was touted a lot as like, this is coding ability. And we basically saturated it, and we still couldn't use it on legacy code. So clearly something was off, because that was like these one-off prompts of make Fibonacci, make a sorting algorithm, make these things that, it's isolated context. It's one page of code. It's ultimately not boiling down to their ability to operate on the real job. SWE-bench, in that regard, was a huge breakthrough. It is operating on a task that is scoped to an entire code repository, right? And it says like, here's the repo, here's the checkout of the repo, and there's this bug. And it took those not from artificially created examples by the researcher, but from actual things in like an open source project's ticket queue from the past. Like, this is the point at which they needed to do this real piece of work. Can the agent do it? And when real scores, respectable scores like over 10%, even over 5%, started coming out of SWE-bench, we knew that coding agents were coming. That was about a year and a half ago now. SWE-bench was based on GitHub repos of popular open source Python repositories. So an obvious weakness there is that's a fairly small cross section of all code. Multi-SWE-bench generalized that to multiple languages, and there are various other SWE-bench variations like that. VersaBench is the one mentioned in the blog post, which is also a paper. If you're into that sort of thing, we put a lot of our research out in journals. And VersaBench is basically a hybrid of a bunch of these other benchmarks that are all sort of related to software development tasks. And so we sort of take this and average your score together, and it's like this is the degree to which you are a versatile development agent, right? And one that is oddly not in VersaBench, but we do run open hands on it, and you would be I think we're the current leader, and you would be particularly interested in this one is SWE-bench, which is about writing unit tests. Now, it's really cool that we have evidence now that researchers are looking at that are trying to tune models and agents. They're looking, one of the scores they score themselves on is, can this thing write tests? That's relatively new. However, it is still, like, I would argue, catastrophically falling short of what we will need, because the only way they know how to measure that so far is, did it produce coverage of the code? And you may know, if you are good at testing, that is like not the only thing you need to know about making good tests. So we're not even like gauging its ability to do anything else with respect to writing tests. There's a good start. Can we even measure the other things we need there? Probably some of them. So stay tuned, But basically, this is where I would need to have a really good summing up thing. But AI hates legacy code. We do need to fix it, and we're trying. So I'll open up the floor. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with some comments and questions that we've had in the chat. I think that was absolutely amazing. There's so much in there that just completely blew my mind, by the way. And
Oh, thank you.
things. It was really good. One question that we had about like the learning path and juniors, or one statement that we had is seniors are good to guide AI because they have a lot of practice, but this is not the case for juniors, and the risk is they are not able to understand what they are doing. I think continuation of this is, you said that coding is different than engineering, but can we admit that coding is the funny part of our job? So in this way, AI will change our job significantly. So I guess that maybe those are two together by the same person.
Sure. I'll take the second first. It's a little easier. If I did not think that AI was going to significantly change our job, I probably wouldn't have left my job at Indeed.com, the largest job site in the world, and went to go work for a startup that built coding agents. Now, I'm not saying that that's what you all should do. Some of you need to be our users. But I did feel strongly about what Open Hands was doing, and in particular, doing it in the open, being an open source coding agent. I felt that coding agents were going to, shape our job significantly enough that to have agency over it, there must be a good open source solution. So I hard agree with the second part of that. I'm simply wanting us to do this right, wanting us to do it with positive effects and not negative effects. And the first part about juniors, can you remind me of that?
So the first one about juniors was seniors are good to guide AI because they have a lot of practice, but this is not the case for juniors. The risk is that they're not able to understand what they are doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely a risk. And I will change it slightly to something I have a like more crisp answer to, and hopefully this will be helpful. People will say, like, if you do this thing that's doing part of it for you, you're not learning. And that's a good, reason in their mind for, like, well, you should do this by hand instead of you should do it with AI. Maybe so. But, like, whether something's difficult is really, like, not your only gauge on whether it's teaching you something. You do, to learn, often have to do something hard, but the inverse isn't good reasoning. Something's hard, therefore it's a good way to learn. No. So I'd say if we want to optimize for learning, as we should, then pedagogy is what we need to think about. There are people who know how to teach. And so look to pedagogy, and not just whether something's manual or automatic. In order to maximize learning, and probably a lot of manual stuff will be involved in learning. Yeah.
There's another question in the chat, and I'll remind anybody who does want to ask their question themselves. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you. Could you summarize in your words, why you think AI hates legacy code more than contemporary code? Also, what techniques can we use to mitigate this disdain?
Yeah. Well, basically, and this is good feedback for what I need to make a little more crisp. All the things that I said characterize like our connotations, our emotional connotations of legacy code are those exact things. And to some extent, makes it hard for us too, but like not in the same proportion or so for the same reason, which is why I encourage not comparing ourselves to computer programs, among other obvious reasons. But some of those things you'll recall were it being high risk, it being difficult to verify that we've made a change correctly, and there being lots of context. The archaic element that comes into play in a few ways, like the training set may be trained on contemporary examples. It may be reaching for APIs that this thing's not, it may be using a programming language that's not prevalent in the training set. Like those things all come into play as well. You know, there's sort of like a host of different reasons. But yeah, does that help?
I think so. Ismail, if you want, it says very much so. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
And contemporary code, really, its sweet spot is like what is well represented in the training data. So, like, if you figure out what like languages the researchers were doing using when they used it, like here's a hint, it's Python, and like, and then you can see otherwise, it's like. So even if it's like contemporary, but it's just like internal, it's using a language your company only uses, or it's using a library your company only does, like these also, but it's not all training set. I've talked about like other ways the agents navigate context. I see Llewellyn from
okay.
famous slide number 45 is
I'm
has
asking
got
you
something.
to unmute, well, and you can probably unmute yourself now. What? Nope. Okay, I'm gonna try this again.
Okay, now. So I was surprised by your was it Duke Nukem example?
Yeah.
That is not how I would have expected you to approach adding a feature to that code base. I would expect you to start with like, maybe we break this file into smaller pieces and maybe we do better naming. And then we like, after it is refactored, we add the feature.
Mhm.
Whereas your approach was just add the feature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the Gilded Rose, you need to restructure in support of adding the feature, and you didn't see the final change. But in this case, the final change is not like a multi-line change. So,
Yeah.
but it's a matter of like, what is the purpose of this kata, right? And I'm glad you asked me to clarify this. There's a part of, code repair and these terms in the research, there's a portion of this process that is localization, they call it, right? Not like localization to a user's time zone or something, but localization to finding the right place to edit. And that is an important part of working with legacy code. But I meant it more as like so that's specifically what I'm trying to do is like this is notable for it being difficult to localize on.
But
And
this is
can I
like, that is the exact thing I think like AI has been great at doing is like take that file and pull out paragraphs and pull out separate files and split this into like I feel like that is the thing it's actually quite good at, which makes it feel like it quite likes legacy code, right? Like the people I know who like legacy code are people who are good at taking this big mess and making it less of a mess.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I was watching things fall out on their face on this example for over a year,
Mhm.
and like we were hanging out during this time. I just didn't happen to show it in our meetups, but
But are you
it's
still finding that? Because like
yeah,
there's a pretty big shift in the last few months.
yeah. So basically, like I've got a lot of examples and kind of like I still need to figure out my time budget here, but this is another helpful thing. Um, so localization less of a problem, and the reason is like agentic search, I think. So you saw like what I used to have to do was like do this whole big summary thing and then give the result and stuff like I did. We did
Yeah.
have reason act agents at that time, and they weren't like good enough at it to be called coding agents. So like even though the architecture was roughly the same, like yeah, now the we've tuned it, the tools are better, the models are better. And so yeah,
I mean, it also
localization
feels like a place a little
it
bit.
has gotten better, but it's still like an important thing to understand is happening. The other thing that's like gotten, I think, especially in the last few months, like Claude Sonnet 4 onward, they have started to train the agents on trajectories, like
Yeah.
what they're called, right? Which is the steps an agent takes over the course of the task, so that you're not just taking an LLM that's trained on prompt response or like a chat and then applying it to this agentic workflow. They have like recorded a bunch of agentic workflows and are using that in the model training process. So they're a lot more snug in this navigation. I think really to have a worthy example, I would have to show something breaking. And
But
I was using such an archaic code base that it doesn't even build in its current state. So
oh,
like, yeah, my needs were playing against each other there.
yeah. Okay. But
Really great
in terms
question.
of using AI to refactor and clean up old code bases,
Yeah.
have you found that to be successful for you?
No. If I'm choosing between yes or no, I'm choosing
Yeah.
no. AI hates legacy code. I would not have that emotional truth if it were being very successful when I try to get it to use old code. Now, I do see it often succeed. Okay, but the fact that it breaks so frequently for me, that like I cannot call that success. I have to watch it, and I'm constantly fighting things that come from other people that aren't watching it as closely.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thanks.
systemically it creates a review bottleneck. It makes defects more likely. All these things, if not very carefully managed.
Oh,
I would probably also like what I really want is agents to be able to use refactoring tools, like the syntax transform. That's what we were working on like last year, and they can. It's just uncommon to plug them into them.
Well, and I see your hand up. And I know you have an answer to that. Is it an immediate follow-up question? Because we have another question in the chat. Okay.
wait, have you not had them be able to use refactoring tools? I would have thought with the C program in particular, because like years ago you were using
Yeah,
command line refactoring with C. Is it not able to do that for you?
it's not a matter of. I'm just talking about what people are doing, not like what I've
What you're
what
doing?
I've found successful. Yeah,
Okay,
and
that
I
makes more
think
sense.
yeah. We're also like I think what we can benchmark has a lot of influence over like what capabilities will be established and like maintained. So actually um, what I should have had after the last slide was like my proposed is exactly the thing you bring up actually. My proposed benchmark is half a joke, but maybe it's not a joke. Is IOCCC-bench, a benchmark created from the International Obfuscated C Code Contest.
Mhm.
And so this is now code where it's the opposite of Duke Nukem. It's not like localization's the problem. It's not navigating this big code base. It's very small. It would fit in a prompt, but it is incredibly difficult and treacherous. And this kind of forces you to use safer techniques. And I think there are enough examples in there you could make a benchmark out of it.
All right. So, follow-up question here is what can we do to, so this is again from the question about the problems that AI has with the legacy code and the summary you provided on that. What can we do to mitigate those problems? Does the solution lie in providing more accurate context?
Yes. So I think there's a slide here that I will just go back to. So my best summary of that is yes, provide context, as you say, both in the forms of being able to navigate the context to find more as needed, and also just like stock, docs you find, like anytime it doesn't do something right, you think maybe I just need to put that in here so it does it again. And you give it feedback. You make sure it's proving that it's doing things well. You reduce the step size and you watch Llewellyn talks.
Maybe we should post Llewellyn's YouTube channel in the chat as well. That's on the other.
I don't know if that's where he puts them, but wherever he's putting this stuff.
Well, the one
Got a
about
playlist.
the practical refactoring is definitely on that channel. But yeah, there's a few other ones that are sprinkled around the internet. For the time being, we can't measure the cost of the removing of human interactions inside of a team due to AI.
Mhm.
So what is your advice to convince people to continue investing energy and effort in in team spirit, team mindset, collaboration, I'm guessing is also in there. I can understand that AI could bypass all human issues like communication and human behavior. So it could be an easy way to get your answer instead of having to talk to your teammates. For me, and this person clarifies, for me, human interactions are the game changer for the business, and this is a main value in the manifesto.
Yeah. So I think that the research on team productivity is firmly on your side on this one. Like, this is an important concern to have. The social cohesion, do we are we all pointing in the same direction? And it is a risk that, if what people AI gives you whatever you ask it for, like it's kind of this genie that gives you something with dubious results, if what you wanted was not to talk to your coworkers, it's going to let you. So in terms of what to do about it, there's a specific answer and then a more conceptual answer. The specific answer would be like something that I do lately is, and really have done throughout my career, I guess, is like really make a point of when you find a silo, there's a knowledge silo or a process silo, and like, only they can do releases. When they're gone, we can't do releases. Only they knew how to fix this. Make people aware of when there's a silo, make the silo themselves, like try to like provoke the intuition of like, oh, we should start realizing when only one of us knows something. That's a problem. That's gonna bite us. But more broadly, you're asking how you convince people. You're asking me how to convince people about a value we both share. And I would suggest focusing on the people that you want to win over, because they have values. And I don't know what they are, just talking to you. So in order to win someone to your point of view, you need to understand like what they actually value, and figure out how you're going to connect that to the behavior change that you want, if indeed it supports it, which it probably will. But you won't get it by selling my values to them and my goals.
So another question in the chat is, you also mentioned coming back to the difference between agents and LLMs, but I feel like we skipped over that part.
Yeah. It's again helpful feedback to see that when I did that, I didn't note that like this is where we get to the difference between an LLM and an agent. When we talk about agents, we're usually talking about something like the Reason Act architecture from this 2023 paper, if you want to see it in specific, but it is a chat loop that can use tools. It is an LLM chat loop that can use tools. How do you get from an LLM to an LLM chat loop? Essentially is you feed them the history of the conversation up to this point, along with like the new message they've gotten from the user or their environment in the case of an agent. And then this is the conversation trajectory in agent parlance. Up to this point, give me the next action, right? So you're giving it sort of this view of the whole conversation. Might not be the whole thing, right? Agent trajectories cannot overflow the prompt limit. So really they're condensed. But that is, this is precisely that difference.
Okay, so sorry, that is very interesting. I actually like how you summarized that up, because making that distinction about agents are the ones that can use the tools and the LLMs are the ones thinking is a really important distinction there. Slightly unrelated, but I read this article, and that's linked in the chat a couple days ago, which suggests that coding agents' returns are inversely proportional to the experience of the user. The more experienced the programmer, the less the return on investment is. What is your opinion on that?
It's short and quippy. It's kind of catchy. It's probably right some of the time. I see times that are the opposite. I see times where this is not helping me at all because I knew what I was doing. And I didn't need to do that much typing. I only needed a little typing. So it's kind of in my way. Whereas if I were trying to do that amount of typing and I didn't know my way around, I didn't know the syntax, whatever, maybe the LLM has enough other context that it's pretty helpful, but it has, a gap in my knowledge, right? Like there are times then when a more junior programmer would find it, more helpful, and the senior not so much. Or I'm senior in this area, but I may use it more, or I'm not senior in this area, but I'm senior in general. I'll shift to it when I'm a little out of my element because, like, I know roughly the code I want to write, but I don't know how to type it here. I don't know how to type it in Python in this library, whatever. And so they're kind of like, this relationship isn't totally linear. It's not the worst generalization, but I'd say there are kind of other shapes to it.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. There's a whole thing in this like senior to junior trajectory conversation thing that has kind of been bothering me, which is like, I'm senior. I've been coding for more than 10 years and being paid for it, like I've been working in a lot of complicated systems. I am so junior in a lot of areas. Like I don't know things about, like, depending on the context that you're in. When I started out coding, my mentor, basically I was saying to him, I don't know anything. There's so much, like, I where do I start? And he basically took me to the Wikipedia page that lists all of the programming languages in the world. And he's like, I don't know any of this stuff either. Like there's so many different coding languages that you could learn. Tech is so big. There's no one who is definitively ever, hey, I'm senior, so I'm better than you. There's always a possibility that someone who's junior knows more about another area of software or dealing with people or something else. Llewellyn also has a really great infographic on this. I feel like this is turning into a Llewellyn advertisement. I will post it in the chat if anybody's interested in it. Cool. I don't see any more questions in the chat. While I go and search for the infographic, if anybody has any remaining questions or wants to think about them, please either ask them in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, so Diana's asked earlier, I think Ray was referring to the Llewellyn talks that are about methods for coding with, yes. I think you were talking about the Llewellyn talks. Which Llewellyn talks would you recommend, Ray?
Oh, that's a question for him.
Oh, and
The thing is, like, we hang out enough that I kind of know that he's like the sort of things he's working on. So I don't know when he's debuted what exactly. I know the process file thing. If the practical refactoring one is where he's talking about process files, wherever that is, that's one of the more recent interesting ones. Also, he has a talk from CraftConf about augmented TDD.
TDD with ChatGPT. Llewellyn, since you're here, could you please share the link to the talk that you did at Craft on process files and the link to the talk that you did at Craft the year before on TDD with ChatGPT? I think both are still valuable to people here. Please and thank you.
Someone like every month though, like people are gonna have these like new ways you can use these agents, and you're gonna have this like feeling of FOMO constantly. Like no matter how much energy you put into following it, I'll just like I'll acknowledge this for a lot of people I know who are feeling it. Like you will feel like there's just all this stuff, but like so many of them are just like ideas we're throwing at the wall. Like they tried it on like their code at their company or whatever. And when we talk about like, you know, things from these tomes, kill it with fire and working effectively with legacy code and stuff, like people have spent like a decade trying it in multiple languages, multiple companies, different industries, and like have discovered these truths and then thought about how we're going to explain them effectively, right? And so there's all this churn of how do we do it with AI now, and this is all written very light pencil.
All right, Llewellyn's posted one video from YouTube. He's going to post another one in a second. I will share these. Okay, that's the process files one. I will share these links on the Calgary Software Crafters Discord as well. So if leave this session and then you know, forget the links, you can always go back to our Discord to find those links. While we're waiting for that last link, I have a question for you, Ray.
All right.
So I was at a conference in Denmark earlier this year, and like 4 years ago, I moved from working in application engineering, which a lot of these legacy code books are written for. A lot of legacy code approaches are very biased towards application engineering. And I moved into a data engineering role. I've managed to TDD in code bases where people say you cannot TDD in data engineering, but data engineering adds its own third dimension of difficulty. And one of the way that they described it at the conference in Denmark is you're not just dealing with legacy code, you're also dealing with legacy state, which means the way that we calculated certain database values a year ago is not relevant to how we're calculating it now, because what we get in and how we optimize our jobs and everything is changing based on the way the world is changing. So do you have any recommendations for also dealing with legacy state in data? With or without AI?
Yeah, like this is more the sort of thing like I've known how to do it when I needed to, but I'm not super up to date on like what all the like how to explain the space of it. But there's a book that's older called Refactoring Databases, which is maybe like the you know a nice jump off point to from understanding if you've read things like Fowler on refactoring, what this looks like when turned into like patterns of how we change database architecture with no downtime. And I was able to use a lot of those techniques. That's not exactly what you mean as far as legacy state. And there are ideas like event modeling, where they say, well, really, there's been this history of events, and it can have many different like views and structures that it takes. But you know, there's really this replayable original thing that you can just say, okay, now we've got a new schema. Let's replay all the original events onto it, right? Like that's a way that is not so much like dealing with this context, but like if we were to architect our you know system to be more resilient, and like Kafka is something they commonly use with this. I'm sure not the only way to do event modeling and event sourcing, but that's certainly like these are techniques that like if you start following this architecture now, that problem, you have a better strategy for it. But then I would say like just don't underestimate modeling in general. Don't underestimate gathering context, talking to all the people, like creating the documents when they're not there. There's been this you know, Agile kind of carried with it this baggage of burning the docs because it was a reaction to extreme over documentation, which was a correct reaction. But like that turned into us undervaluing actually the written word and thinking that we were going to get by only off of face to face. Like, and over time you do need the context.
That's a really good
Well,
cool. There is another question that popped up while I was asking my question, which is, I'd like to get Ray's opinion on AI tools to do a first pass on code reviews. Can they offer more than what static code analysis tools can do? For example, SonarQube.
well, if you're talking about SonarQube, it's redacted. I like CodeScene anyway. So more isn't how I would say it. I would say different. They're different kinds of beasts. We don't necessarily think of static analysis and linters as like symbolic AI per se. That's a little fancy for what they do. But if you picture them on my graph, the static analysis is right there on very accurate low scope tools. And, LLMs are more on the side of very inaccurate high scope tools. And so I wouldn't suggest moving from one to the other, but I absolutely would advocate certain forms of LLM enhanced, here's the thing, when we call it code review, I would say LLMs in the code review process, like linters are in the code review process. I do not consider linters to be code reviewers. And I worry when we say LM code review, like we're going to start to see it not only as a replacement for a linter, but as a replacement for a person. And even the instructions that you want it to follow, the things we ought to be looking for on which folders, which problems ought the LLM be scanning for. Like these are all ways in which we could like use this to great effect, right? Is there something that's been biting you a lot that you can't make an automated check for, but every time someone messes with this folder, you want the LM to look for this specific thing. Well, that's like much better use case, right? Than like, hey, just throw an LM the diff that doesn't even know how we like to do things. In which case you get all sorts of false signal.
I don't see any further questions in the chat.